Welcome to the PI Podcast. I'm your host, Matt, and joining me as usual is my co host, political scientist, meme lord, and first runner up of the Ginoong Trotsky ng Pilipinas 2020, Borge.
What the hell? Okay, okay, that's still surprising. Again, I remember Dr. De Castro calling me Trotsky every time. PI nating lahat. Board here at your service.
And congratulations on that win. I heard you did very well in the swimsuit competition.
What the
But I believe you should have won actually, and I think it's rigged. And speaking of rigged, the U.S. election. No, no, but actually we're back so soon, and you're probably wondering why we're back. Haven't had enough of U.S. elections. Well, I think but you and I decided to
Yeah, yeah.
finish what we started because there's actually have
Mm,
been a lot of new developments of the U.S.
mm,
election. So we recorded it way before at
mm.
Halloween, and then when we released it, I think there's still people were panicking and joining the ride, and they're
Yep.
like monitoring it all our pot. So what did you observe on social media?
And social media. Well, first and
Or
foremost, yeah. I mean, general observations that it's entertaining that Trump doesn't want to go out of the White House, which is
mm,
amusing. Anyway, regarding social media, I mean, my news feed was flooded with Biden's picture for the past few days,
mm-hmm,
on one hand. And on the other hand, there's an emerging theme of Filipinos saying it's our turn to get
mm-hmm.
rid of a populist.
Hashtag TayoNaman. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, just in case you guys aren't aware, if you're living under a rock, the elections just concluded in favor of Joe Biden. But it wasn't. But for 4 days, I think people
Mm,
were voting, and they are counting, and it was a nail biter. It was a
it was.
roller coaster. People didn't know. People didn't know, and then all of a sudden, um, Biden started getting votes nonstop, and
Mm,
people are saying, "Stop the votes or keep the votes counting." So it's a
mm.
lot. But there's now issues of possible, cheating. What do you think,
Mm.
George, about this?
That
Do you
one,
think that
that
Trump
one.
Trump is also thinking that he might be cheated? So what do you think?
That is an accusation that I think it's worth looking into. I mean, Trump is still an American citizen. He
Mm-hmm.
has the right to complain on such matters. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's still apt to look into. Is it valid? Is it not? That would be in the realm of conspiracy theorizing
Mm-hmm.
at this point.
Right. Mm-hmm.
What about you? Did
Yeah,
you think that
because
shit happened?
apparently, well, honestly, I'm more or less on your side here. Like he has the right to, and but the way the media is treating it, CNN, like
Mm,
immediate, and even Fox News, they cut his press conferences off just for saying
mm,
it's all lies without basis. But it's almost as if he's hiding. They are hiding something,
mm,
and of course we know that they hate Trump. The mainstream media hates Trump.
mm,
So yeah, it's a bit. I mean, and of course there are instances where people
mm.
are reporting fraud, faulty ballots. Some dead people have voted. Joe Frazier apparently voted despite being dead. The dead are coming back to life. People who have died of COVID are now back, like with their names like they vote. Like they voted. So it's like
It's an old
I'm
trick.
again. It is an old trick. In fact, it happens here in the Philippines as well. So we know what cheating looks like. But again, you and I are not here to comment on that.
Mm-hmm.
And I are actually here to discuss the actual relevance, bloated or otherwise,
Mm-hmm.
of the United States elections on the Philippine people. Kasi
Mm,
mga Pilipino tayo. Pilipino
mm,
tayo. Kaya dapat, focus natin sa Pilipinas.
mm.
But again, for now, because we are so obsessed, let's try to determine why are we obsessed. Maybe quickly, like, what do you
Why?
think
Why?
Filipinos yeah, why are they looking at America right now?
Yeah, I think that would be. I think I mentioned this one last during the last episode, but yeah, again, I think we need to answer that question. Why are we concerned with American politics? And at this point, why are we obsessed with it? I think 2 points, two
Mm-hmm.
intertwined points. First would be the United States is still our ideal. It is still our
Mm-hmm.
ideal. It is our model, which is not. I think I clarified this one last episode. It's not a bad thing to have a model. It's just a matter of looking at which part. So yeah, so the
Mm-hmm.
United States is still our model, and we are watching it in crisis. So yeah, those are the two reasons why we are to an extent obsessing over it. We have been watching its
Mm-hmm.
crisis for the past 4 years.
Hmm. Well, for those of you who didn't join us last time, I decided to check that out. There was one of the big
Mm.
disagreements we had. I suppose last time you took the side that we shouldn't be looking at America's president, more on its past.
Yeah.
But I think we kind of had a middle ground saying we should, as much as possible, look at the whole story. But because we have limited
Mm.
brain cells, as you put it, we
Mm.
need to calibrate, at least
Mm.
balance it.
Yeah.
Past and present. And this present, I think there's still something wrong with the way people are over equating our problems, with
Mm.
their problems, and that's part of it. And I think I mentioned you last time. It's supposed to be like watching a play.
Mm.
You watch Hamlet,
Mm.
and you learn from Hamlet's mistakes, but you will never be, Danish. You'll never be a character in Hamlet. So I think that's, and in a way, that's what you said last time, that people strive, or Filipinos kind of try to strive to be like Americans or feel connected to
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
America. Yeah. But other times it's like, perhaps it's like a spectator sport, because
Mm.
I think you can see the data going up and down, the
Mm.
numbers, and I think that is what's so appealing. You could see the
Yeah.
numbers go up and down, red and blue, nice colors. So it was, I think it's their one thing I think they have mastered is, quantifiably
Mm.
presenting their electoral results. So I think that's very well, it's attractive to us because we haven't figured that out. But other than that, yeah, you're right. I think well, spectator sports, it's
Mm.
entertaining, but at the same time, yeah, there's over equating
Mm.
our desires. And the moment we see some sort of semblance
Mm.
with American politics, we latch onto that. It's like, yeah, we can do that. We can do the same. So I think, well, that's enough for the present. We can't
Yeah.
exactly make make an analysis on what's going
Mm.
on, since that's it's not any of our business really.
Mm.
But right now, I think we should take on certain misconceptions that have been popping up recently in the discussion.
Mm.
Namely, I think, for number one, particularly with the question of Donald Trump and America, and even certain countries have
Mm.
watched it, and they're
Mm.
watching Trump finally
Oh
lose.
yeah. Yeah.
Everyone
Yeah.
who hates Trump went out in the street despite quarantine. You know, despite quarantine, out in the street to celebrate, honking
Mm.
horns. Playing music,
Mm.
and now they're saying like, perhaps we can do the same with Duterte.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
if Trump can be beaten, Duterte can be beaten. So
Mm.
it's funny. What do you think about that? Like, sometimes DDS right now are also watching it and saying, but it's not like they're siding with Trump now because he's similar to Duterte. So what do you think about that comparison with Trump and
Yeah.
Duterte, who has been called the Trump of the East?
Yeah. Trump of the East. God, it's again they have very different backgrounds. That's one thing. I think it's even to
Mm.
an extent. I'll be generous. I think it's unfair for people to compare Trump with Duterte. It's unfair to Duterte to be compared to
Oh
Trump, as
wow.
far as I'm concerned. So yeah, as
Mm-hmm.
far as personal background is concerned, it is unfair to Digong to be compared to Trump. So, but regarding that one,
Mm-hmm.
are they actually comparable? I think cannot deny the similarities, the mercurial nature of their rhetoric, their firebranding, so on and so forth. But there's a disparity that we cannot deny. Okay, they're both
Mm-hmm.
illiberal, but their illiberalism are different. And it's
Mm-hmm.
basically based on the difference between the United States right now and the Philippines and its
Mm-hmm.
contemporary conditions. So
Right.
to be conscious of the difference between Duterte and Trump is to be conscious of our difference with the United States, and I think that is
Mm-hmm.
important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what are those differences, in the context that produced Trump and Duterte? What do you think?
Well, first and foremost, we're not racist. We're not that racist.
You
That's
said
one
that.
thing.
Well, we are somewhat racist. We
Yeah,
have
yeah,
racist jokes, but we don't
yeah.
lynch people.
Yeah, we don't. It's yeah, that's one
Yeah.
thing. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
another thing would be well regarding that one, regarding the calls that we can do it ourselves. First and foremost, Trump never enjoyed high approval ratings like Duterte.
Right.
So that's
Yeah,
already
Duterte
quite
has 91%, while
yeah,
Trump, so, yeah,
yeah,
Trump's never reached majority. So
yeah.
yeah. It's funny, and one thing they also say about both Trump and Duterte is that they are both authoritarian. Like, there's an rise of authoritarianism around the world, starting
Mm,
with Duterte and then Trump. In fact, nauna pa si Duterte kay Trump eh. So yeah, for once they're following us. But then let's think about it. Is Trump actually authoritarian? Well, I think Duterte, without a doubt, is. Duterte managed to like fire a Supreme Court justice. Trump
Mm.
appointed, but that's within his powers.
Mm.
Managed to eliminate, ABS-CBN, at
Mm.
least publicly, the franchise.
Mm.
Trump never shut down any of
Mm.
his media opponents. He
Mm.
he pissed them off, but he never shut them down.
Mm.
Duterte uh, encouraged outright to kill people, making
Mm.
shoots like brr. Trump never did that.
Yep.
So there's a lot of things that Duterte did that are authoritarian, but Trump did. I mean, okay, Trump is an asshole, but he is an authoritarian, while Duterte is an asshole and authoritarian. So yeah, that's one thing that you have to realize, Um, so and I try to look while preparing for this podcast,
Yeah. Yeah.
is Trump authoritarian at all? And I'm like, I look at what he's done, and I
Mm.
think he hasn't really done anything authoritarian.
Mm.
Do you agree? Like, what do you think Trump is authoritarian?
Uh, is he? Is he? At least I can settle with the fact that they both want to be an authoritarian. I can settle with that.
Mm.
They both of them want to have more power. The thing is,
Mm-hmm.
in the United States, institutions are far stronger. So there's
Mm-hmm.
still relative balance of power among the government branches in the United States. In the Philippines, such a thing doesn't exist. Hence, Duterte is a bit more successful with his endeavors to concentrate
Mm-hmm.
power, to militarize
Right.
things.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
And he has a basically rubber stamp Congress, but the Democratic Congress is still fighting
mm,
Trump and keeping him
yeah,
in check. So whatever.
yeah.
Yeah. Um.
Our rubber stamp Congress is not unique to Duterte.
Mhm.
Every president of the
Yeah.
Philippines enjoys such a thing. That's why we don't have the same American problem of budgets not being approved.
Yeah. Because like right now there's a Republican Senate, so they
Mm,
can actually, well, I think they're winning now. So even if Biden wins, they can actually block,
mm,
and they've actually done a great job blocking Obama.
mm,
So that's why there's a lot more politicking. They can politic, we can't. So that's one
mm,
thing to think about. So you're right in that we're very different.
mm,
Um, so yeah, I think people fail to realize is that although Trump tweets like an authoritarian, selfish,
mm,
narcissistic asshole that he
mm,
is, these aren't policies. But if you look at his actual policies, he's actually followed the Republican line.
mm,
He's catered to jobs, job creation,
mm,
deregulated, and he had somewhat of a stronger hand in foreign policy. He's retreated in some
mm,
areas, but
mm,
reemerge in others. And I think while we're in the foreign policy, I think a lot of like Filipinos
mm,
perhaps want Trump because they foresee, like, they think a Trump presidency might help keep a check on China, because
mm,
of course he famously did the trade war on China and kept China in check for a while. They felt that. You and I were in China when that happened, and
mm.
China was panicking. You think that? What do you think about that? In global politics, quickly.
Is that one? Is that the reason why we actually like Trump? But yeah, regarding global politics, I think Trump's position is a bit more ambivalent. So
Mm,
that gives a bit more space for Chinese diplomatic ties to wiggle around. So I think that's. I mean, Trump is both anti. Again, he's pro-Trump. Trump is pro-Trump.
mhm.
He is against or for China, depending on contingency. So that leaves a bit
Right.
more space for China to wiggle in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we're not IR scholars, but
Mm,
IR is very unstable, and what's true one day can be completely false the next.
yep.
So we'll never know. But I think that's why people are supporting Trump, because yeah,
Mm,
it's global politics interest. But speaking of like global politics and Trump's opinion around the world, it's funny
mm,
that the Philippines has gotten attention with that, because
mm,
earlier this year on January 9th, I think it was said that the Philippines gives Trump their highest support. I think it was around 77% of Filipinos approve of Trump compared to any other country in the world. And then 10 months later, I think around October 30, Trump um, Well, Trump received 58%, a bit lower, but still pretty high. So making the Philippines the second highest approval rating, for Trump, right under Mongolia.
Yeah,
So
that's.
it's like, so
I
it's
think that's the thing.
Mongolians and then Filipinos are the top fans in the world. So what do you think about that?
No, I think regarding that one, I
Yeah.
think our colleague Sir Louis posted something on that one. I think he said that if the Philippines
Mm-hmm.
was a state, Trump would have won.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's one thing.
Oh, yeah.
If we were a
Interesting.
state, we
Mm-hmm.
were a state,
And why?
Trump would have won.
Mm-hmm. All right. So let's move on to like what the Filipinos think. So why do you think
Hmm.
Filipinos like Trump so much?
Ah, God. Why? I think first and foremost we need to divide. We can talk about Filipinos here in the Philippines and Filipinos abroad in the United
Okay.
States. So do you know
Mm.
anyone abroad? Any Filipinos in the United
Well,
States who are pro Trump?
well, actually, I have a lot of relatives. They are definitely progressive, being young
Hmm.
people, my cousins.
Hmm.
But I do have my dad's friend, actually.
Hmm.
He decided to vote for Trump because of religious reasons. Because apparently, because Trump approved conservative judges, quote unquote, Supreme Court judges, they're able to protect the unborn from abortions. Because
Hmm.
that's the main thing. What they're afraid of is, you know, uh, le- Biden might legalize abortions, and
Hmm.
Biden actually famously sued the Little Sisters of Charity. I think, I'm not sure, but
Hmm.
I'll double check that. And because they're nuns,
Hmm.
and refused to provide abortions. That's what the Democrats want. They want abortions to be more available, and of
Hmm.
course, that's against Christian values, which Filipinos
Hmm.
share. So that's one thing. And in fact, I know I'm part of like a prayer group, and our part of our prayers was to pray for Donald Trump because
Did,
apparently Donald Trump might be a more Christian or Christian friendly president.
did you pray
Yeah.
for Trump?
I prayed for God's will to be done. So it's
Okay,
nonpartisan. So yeah, so yeah, I deviated from the prayer group, but Lord, thy will be done.
fair
So
enough,
yeah,
fair enough, fair enough.
yeah. Anything else? But
Yeah,
yeah,
regarding
so
that
that's
one,
one.
yeah, what?
Religion. Yeah.
Yeah, religion would be one factor. Why do we like Trump? I
Mm-hmm.
think it's just because Filipinos like Americans. That's it. I hypothesize that eventually we would have the same approval with Joe Biden.
It doesn't matter who is president. You know,
Yeah, to an
we'd
extent.
love him.
Yeah, to an extent.
Interesting.
To an extent. But I would like to qualify that with again, so much they have compared Duterte and Trump so much, even if the comparisons
Mm-hmm.
are to an extent invalid or limited,
Right.
still it sticks in your head. It sticks in your head if you can
Right.
equate Duterte with Trump. So probably it's a transference.
Mm-hmm.
They project their
Right.
ideal stability here in the Philippines by supporting a more stable
Mm-hmm.
Trump administration. So yeah. So again,
Mm-hmm.
comparison that leads to equation sticks. That's how the human
Mm.
brain works.
Yeah. In fact, some people like make the post saying, you're just pro Trump because you're pro Duterte. And, you well, once a fascist supporter, always a fascist supporter. So something like that. Is Trump fascist, by the way? I mean, or are they fascist?
No, no,
What do you
God, no.
think?
God, no.
Neither of them?
Neither of them. But okay, Trump and Duterte. Trump is certainly not fascist. Trump is not fascist. That's one
Mm-hmm.
thing. He
Ooh.
did not militarize American society. Now, if you think that people
Mm-hmm.
carrying guns is an act of militarizing the American society, then you clearly have no idea of why people are carrying guns in the United States. It's not about them being
Mm-hmm.
militaristic. It's just
Mm-hmm.
their sense of freedom and militias.
Mm-hmm.
For
Ooh.
Duterte, is Duterte fascist? I think at this point he is borderline. He's closer
Mm-hmm.
to being a fascist right now, but for the longest time he
Mm-hmm.
is not. But
Mm-hmm.
is he a fascist now? I think not yet.
Right.
There's still one part that is missing.
Right. And so I have to agree. I have nothing else to add to that. But I
Mm,
think for some reason right now, I think even though they're not the same,
mm,
what they do have in common is they're both um, Well, they're both impulsive and they're both narcissistic, and
Hmm.
for some reason, people are fascinated by that. Psychology speaking, and since we're into personality politics, so and we approve of that personality, so
Hmm.
perhaps people might think of us as well, whatever, but maybe that's it. We like assholes. My
Okay,
God.
okay.
But
Regarding that
anyway,
one, I think okay. One thing that brought Trump into the White House was that people in the forest, people who never voted before, started voting because they found someone
the
in Trump.
rural
Yeah,
areas,
the
right?
basically the backwaters. They found someone who they can project their obsessions, frustrations, and
Mm-hmm.
assholery upon. So that's one thing.
Assholery. Yeah.
So yeah, Trump became a character that they can project their deficiencies, if one can say that one, but their tendencies,
Mm-hmm.
to be more specific. The same thing with
Right.
the Philippines. I think again, our personality politics is not about us worshiping an entity per se. It's about
Mm-hmm.
us projecting our tendencies on that leader.
Mm.
So I think
Yeah.
it's a misunderstanding to say that that we worship leaders. Yes,
Right.
that's a result, but
Yeah.
that's not the cause.
So are you saying you are who you vote for?
Yeah, simple as that.
Mm.
Simple as that.
Mm.
Filipinos, those who voted for Duterte, share something that
Mm.
he more or less embodies. And that
Mm-hmm.
act of sharing is that person projecting that ideal to
Mm-hmm.
the candidate.
Uh-huh. Okay, interesting. Speaking of projection, I think we can move on to the next topic, which
Mm.
is basically the progressives. Now
Mm.
that they're everyone, all the progressives, liberals, uh,
Mm.
well, critics of Duterte are celebrating Biden's win
Mm.
as a hope for counter-fascism, counter-populism,
Mm.
and yeah, perhaps they're also projecting their desires on Biden's win. And now
Yep.
they're saying, hashtag tayo naman.
Mm.
And now there's a debate and saying, what can we actually learn? But let's try to ask ourselves this: is there any way that we can apply the lessons in with Biden's campaign to the progressives here? What do you think about that?
Not that one. Is
Mm-hmm.
there a way? Is there? I am.
Well, first of
I,
all, if they did cheat, then that's not cheat. That ruins everything. I'm not saying, but just saying if if it's true.
So, is it
Go
is
ahead.
it is it a possibility that the Philippine or liberals in the Philippines or progressives in the Philippines would choose the least offensive candidate by 2022? So that's another thing. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that's something that
Mm-hmm.
might be applied in the
Mm-hmm.
case of the Philippines. They may choose someone who is least offensive. But then again,
Mm-hmm.
going back to looking at history regarding looking at the United States as an example, we must take into account that
Mm-hmm.
even if we try to do what America did, the results would always vary because we have different conditions.
Mm-hmm.
So you have
Mm-hmm.
France, who started a revolution inspired by the United States.
Mm-hmm.
They ended up
Mm-hmm.
killing people because the conditions are different.
Oh, right. So American and French Revolution were very different. While Americans were organized and they had an army and they had a constitution, the French just went wild, killed the noblemen, and
No, no, no,
they
no.
started killing each other.
It's not that.
Robespierre.
It's not
Yeah.
really that. The French Revolution also has constitution and an army. It's more of the class relations. Class relations in
Mm,
France were was more aggravated because they came from a feudal past.
mm,
The American Revolution came
mm-hmm.
out of a non-feudal society. Simple as that.
Well, if I can clarify, actually, in France, it was, I think, Hannah Arendt in her analysis of
Mm,
the revolution. French Revolution was based on, it was like a firecracker, like it just exploded, and it
mm,
wasn't as incremental. It wasn't as, how you say,
mm,
organized. Where in America, they organized, they
mm,
recruited, they wrote things down, they discussed. So I
mm,
suppose that's one. Yeah, you're right. The conditions there are different.
mm,
So just to clarify that, well, as here, I think because we were maybe we might end up like the French
mm,
Revolution because they thought that America could do it. They just did it without
mm.
actually studying what actually happened.
Yeah.
Like perhaps in a superficial level. So here, and I agree with you that we have to actually study the past, and also in
Mm,
a bit the recent present. You know,
Yeah,
that's
but
important. If the
I think
French looked at
yeah.
what happened in America that time,
Mm,
you know. So
mm.
yeah.
No, I think
Hmm.
Arendt may have romanticized the French Revolution. It was also
Well,
gradual, as far as I'm
no,
concerned. It was more prone to an
not
explosion.
romanticized, but
It
more like it's not romanticized, but I think she was very critical. But perhaps she was maybe
straw
didn't
man.
give it enough credit. There, okay, there, maybe perhaps. Well, we'll have to read that again in another time.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, the
But yeah,
French Revolution.
let's just say
What
context
she did say
matters.
was it was out of necessity rather than out of foundation. You know, but and again, we can debate and
Yeah, yeah.
institutions about Arendt.
I'd
I think
agree with.
one thing that they're particularly hinging on, the
Mm,
progressives here with Biden,
mm,
is two main factors. Number one, voting. Biden, well, it was the highest voter turnout in American history. Not only did Trump get more votes than he did last year, but
mm,
any Republican candidate, as well as Biden, more votes than Obama. Now,
mm,
some people might say that these are like might be voter fraud, but there are people who maybe voted for the first time in their lives,
mm,
and then here and made their voice heard.
mm,
So, assuming that is true, you know, and it's not fraud, and perhaps there's an argument saying that if we all voted and if we voted a particular way, they could change things. That's one. And number two, activism works, and activism of articulating their complaints with Trump and what's wrong with the order of the against fascism, against the
mm,
police, against
mm,
racism, you know, Antifa, Black Lives Matter, and all these George Floyd uh, protests.
mm.
You know, perhaps we can learn from that and say, let's all go. You know, perhaps reviving the uh, people power, you know,
Mm.
here in the Philippines, which I think has become dead, and we have had like people power fatigue.
Yeah.
So is there? Do you think that's what do you think about that?
They're already trying to do that here in the Philippines. That's why they keep on protesting. They're already trying it here, yet they
Mm-hmm.
cannot get the numbers right.
Mm-hmm.
They cannot get the numbers right
Mm-hmm.
because they
But
don't. People don't want to protest. Simple as that.
mhm.
So the
Why
thing
not?
is, they don't want to protest because they find it as ineffective, as far as data
Mm-hmm.
is concerned. Simple as that. And I think the progressives here, left or liberal, they just don't get it. And by not getting it, they perpetuate that inaction because the more that
Mm-hmm.
they appear as ineffective in their public displays of protest, the more
Mm-hmm.
do the inactive believe that they are ineffective. Hence, it's a vicious
Mm-hmm.
cycle.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
the people power fatigue is just one part of that one. But yeah,
Right.
we're tired of that one.
Mm. uh, I think one thing that's gaining traction, I think I showed you this before, is that
Mm,
after Biden won, I think was it Manila Bulletin that released that about
mm,
a few, like 300,000 or 600,000 first-time voters registered for 2022
mm.
elections. So I think people are already motivated for that, for voting. Uh, I think I know your answer here, but might as well ask it.
Yeah.
And are you hopeful for that? Yeah, okay, yeah.
No, am
Are
I
you hopeful
hopeful?
for 2022?
No, I actually don't care about Philippine elections, but what kind of hope?
All right.
That's the thing is,
Mhm.
okay, fine.
What kind of hope?
People may keep on the youth may register. New first time voters may register.
Hmm.
Can the youth
Hmm.
vote as a block? That's another question. I think that's an
Mm.
important question. Can the youth
Mm.
vote as a block? What if part of that youth
Hmm.
actually votes for Duterte? So more
Mm.
votes for
Duterte
Duterte.
youth, di ba?
Yeah,
Well,
Duterte yun
that's a
eh.
yeah.
It's a
Tuyot. Duterte youth. But yeah, actually, I think that's one thing that's emerging right now. That particularly Generation Z, or Zoomers, are getting more and more frustrated with their traditional parents and elders, and so now they're more and more. I think right now, I think I mentioned this in our first episode, that the
yeah.
youth right now are more politically active than our
Mm,
generation, like than you and I,
yeah.
and they're more sensitive to issues right now, and
Mm,
perhaps they want to make their voice heard in these
yeah.
elections.
Yeah.
So it's up to again reformist candidates to
Mm,
appeal to this youth, and but apparently they're well, maybe Vico Soto, but I don't know.
yeah.
But yeah, it's up to them to listen and to
Mm,
cater to these interests. Uh, it's ripe for that. But the
Mm,
thing is, it'll depend on what will happen. A lot can happen. But I think right now, and I think we can talk about this some
mm,
other time. The youth more than ever are making their voices heard, and they're now being
mm.
red tagged, similar to
Yeah.
like martial law right now.
Mm,
So it's tough, especially with the anti-terror law. They might be
mm.
subject to that law, which is dangerous.
Well,
Anything else to add on that?
Himas
Anything
Rehas.
to add?
No, regarding that one,
What is that?
again,
Mm-hmm.
again,
Youth.
if the youth will just be focusing on elections, what we will see for
Mm-hmm.
the next few decades would be an entire generation who would be far more jaded than their predecessors, because
Mm,
that is the system
okay.
that their vote would maintain.
Why more jaded? Why not just jaded? How are they
More
more jaded than previous generations?
because their hopes were higher than the previous generations, and the higher you go,
Mm,
the faster, no, not really the faster, but the deeper you fall.
and the deeper the fall, the more it hurts.
Yeah,
So,
simple as
okay,
that.
all right. Well, one thing I'm studying counterculture right now, especially the '60s, and every
Mm,
youth has their rebellious side, like
mm,
the the hippies,
mm.
in the '60s.
The
So of
Hegelians.
course, the aliens. So yeah, but I'm not sure how, like if it's any harder. But I think yeah, youth activism tends to be temper out as you get older, which is sad. But hopefully, it will materialize in something. Perhaps
Mm,
that's me being more optimistic. But that's us. And I think let's move on to our last chunk, which
yep.
is if, for instance, like people are getting it
Mm,
wrong.
mm,
Sorry to say, Trump is not Duterte. Duterte is not Trump.
yep.
And I think it's not, and the TayoNaman, there's a lot more work to do besides imitating or aping Biden
Mm,
and his coalition. So if that is the case, if we are different, then what must we do? How should we use the story of America that is unfolding right now? And how should we move forward from this? Why don't you start?
how should we use it? Should we even use it? Should
There. Okay.
That's one thing. Should we even use this story, or should it just serve as a spectacle
Mm-hmm.
for us to just
Mm-hmm.
watch? Now, okay, I'll answer it in two ways. First, in a
Mm-hmm.
more pessimistic sense, I would say, nah. Well, we cannot use this story. It is America's present. It is not ours. And if we
Mm-hmm.
do try to use it, this is my more optimistic side talking. If we would
Mm-hmm.
try to learn from it or be inspired by it, then we must be equally sensitive to our current conditions,
Mm-hmm.
to the structures in place, to the candidates
Mm-hmm.
who may run eventually, to the
Mm-hmm.
tendencies of the people, the majority in the Philippines. So we must be sensitive to that if we are going to use this 2020 elections as an inspiration for 2022. So yeah,
Mm-hmm. Mm,
those.
okay. Well, again, this is where we
Mm,
diverge, but again, that's the great thing. We have different opinions.
mm,
Is that I think we do need
mm,
to use this, but again, without over equating us with
yeah.
America. We'll never be America. I agree with what you said there, but similar to that, I think it's a scenario that we have to avoid, which
Mm,
is you know right now, because people don't trust progressive and Democrat media because they know they hated Trump. And
mm,
sometimes it's like Trump at all costs. That's why it's actually quite plausible that
mm,
they cheated to beat Trump. So whether no matter which side cheats, it will be
mm,
terrible for the credibility of elections for everyone
mm,
and for going down the road in the future. So that's
mm,
one thing we have to understand. And number two, you're right. The progressive coalitions are quite different from here in America, but I think it's similar to okay, like it will never be uh well, what I can say is it won't watching America won't be like a scientifically correct one-to-one comparison.
yep.
It won't be scientifically stable. But
Mm,
perhaps it's like I suppose like a realistic fairy tale. And I think it's also as perhaps I empathize with them to a point. It's like a fairy tale that you learn a lesson. It's not that dragons exist or that you will ever encounter a dragon, but the point is, dragons can be beaten. I think that's what
mm,
Neil Gaiman and I think he quoted G.K. Chesterton. He's like,
mm,
it doesn't matter. Like fairy tales exist not because dragons are real. It's not to teach you that dragons are real, but but that even a dragon can be beaten.
Mm.
That's the point. So in other words, an organized
Mm.
coalition of people like can actually topple a president. I think that's the one thing they're hinging on.
Mm.
Even an well, regardless if you think he's a fascist or an authoritarian,
Mm.
an asshole leader can be toppled, and
Mm.
that's another thing decency can want. So I think it's not a one-to-one thing, but I
Mm.
suppose in that level of abstraction, it is a fairy tale that we can somewhat use to motivate ourselves.
Mm.
But watching America and learning from America can be used as data, but it does
Mm.
not substitute the work we need to do here. We
Mm.
need to study our own people, our own institutions,
Yeah.
and our own conditions. So yeah, again, inspiration, but not actual data. We need to process a bit, right? So that's
Inspiration, not
that's what I
mimicry.
think. Whew.
Simple as that. Inspiration, not
There we
mimicry.
go. Common ground.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And I think that closes the book.
Yep.
Pasingit lang to. This is episode
Pasingit episode.
5.5. But hopefully you learned something from this. But for right
Yep.
now, let's move on to recommendations, where we recommend a movie, a book, a material, paper, whatever
Yeah, yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
might help with this discussion. So,
Yeah,
what do
yeah,
you
yeah.
have for us this week, Borge?
Well, last time I recommended documentaries. Now I'm going to recommend my own papers for some reason. No, we
Ooh,
have been
you're so
mentioning the term
humble.
we have been mentioning the term spectacles over and over again. But just to
Mm-hmm.
inform the listeners, I did write some works on spectacles out of my own research. So I'm recommending them to read two papers if they can, if they have
Mm-hmm.
time. I know that they can. It's just a matter of having time to read it. But the first paper would be reconceptualizing political alienation on spectators,
Mm-hmm.
spectacles, and public protests. So this is where my argument that public protests are virtually perceived as useless by many people. This is where it comes from. So the data is in this paper. The other one would be "'Tis but a habit in an unconsolidated democracy, habitual voting, political alienation, spectatorship."
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is where my argument that elections is just it's habitual and meaningless, if not worthless, would come from.
Ooh,
And
ouch.
this is where
Uh-huh.
data would also come in. So yeah, I think I would
Mm-hmm.
recommend those two papers. I think we can discuss some topics related to that one in the future. So again, my
Mm-hmm.
take on last note on American politics. Again, better look at the past. You mentioned the possibility of cheating, but historically speaking, if politicians can hide the possible involvement of the mafia with John F. Kennedy's election, then they can very well hide
Mm-hmm.
someone's whatever they did with Biden's.
Wait, JFK cheated? Oh no.
Well,
Oh well,
yeah,
they hit it. So I'm like, okay,
they
ooh.
were able to hide
I should probably.
that problem.
It's funny. I actually I was reading last summer the John F. Kennedy biography, but I never finished. It was this thick. I never
Hmm.
finished that. Got to that part. So spoilers, but I should probably get back to that. But thank you. That may be self promotion, but I think those are interesting papers. I have read them in the past. So
You're still
yeah,
alive.
I hope
Yay.
you. Okay, I'm still alive, so that's fine. And yeah, hope you learned something from that. On the other hand, I don't really have papers that is related to this topic, but one thing I can recommend is well, two things. I think one is an adaptation of the other. The title is "Our Brand
Hmm.
is Crisis."
Hmm.
It's well, I first encountered it in 2015 the movie starring Sandra Bullock and Billy Bob Thornton,
Hmm.
who they both play competing campaign managers, and
Hmm.
they're Americans, and they're trying to manipulate the election in Latin America. And Sandra Bullock's candidate is like a how you say a prototype authoritarian populist, and this basically shows the process as to how like they spin the story of election, and perhaps it's similar to what happened here. Perhaps because maybe they spun how Trump is handling COVID, and so Biden is the answer, etc. So perhaps that's similar to what happened. I think since we're thinking about elections, usually it's also a good time to watch dramatic
Hmm.
representation of elections. But
Hmm.
if you The reviews were quite lukewarm for this one, but I like Sandra Bullock, so it was a fine movie.
Mm.
But much better is the original material, which is a 2006 documentary,
Mm.
which is the actual factual real life campaign managers, and they're followed around in South America. And it's scary because even though they got, you know, that their client elected, they kind of ask, no, the question there is, was it ethical for them to have this someone elected, like out of fear, is it right to be manipulated out of fear? And it's quite even possible that although Trump might have been also elected out of fear, perhaps Biden might have also been elected through fear. Ooh, so it's never quite right to do it out of fear. All right, be careful, don't be afraid. Nasa Halloween pa tayo. So anyway, that's it. I think this is a quicker episode kasi pasingit lang tayo.
Yep, yep,
But I think we covered all the ground. I think this was more fast paced. Don't you agree? Yeah.
yep. It is fast paced. We're just
And
so
trimmer,
on and so forth.
hopefully.
Yep.
Hopefully it's much easier to take in. Ooh, okay. It's shorter is easier to take in. So yeah. Anyway, so we'll see you again in your regular schedule around maybe in 2 weeks. But thank you for joining us.
Yep.
Please remember to send us your comments, questions in our email, pipodcastph@gmail.com, or in Facebook, YouTube, Anchor, Spotify, and wherever you find podcasts. So please join us, join the conversation. But until then,
Magandang gabi, mga ka-PI.
if you enjoy the jazzy tunes of this podcast, you can find similar works with John Victor Ordonez of the band John's Dirty Old Sneakers at Spotify and SoundCloud. The logo and design were done by Shin Miyamoto and Anthony Borja.